In this video, we'll look at actually implementing the process to go through first normal form, second normal form, and third normal form on a simple table. So first normal form, as I mentioned before, deals with eliminating repeating groups. And generally this is not a difficult thing to do because we recognize immediately that a multi-valued attribute cannot be implemented. And when you take a multi-valued attribute and implement it properly, your table will be in first normal form. So we really want to start looking at second normal form. And second normal form is the process where we eliminate partial functional dependencies. Now again, remember, you can only have partial functional dependencies if you have a composite primary key. That is a primary key that is composed of more than one column or more than one attribute. If your primary key has only one attribute, then you are in second normal form. When you have a partial functional dependency, is you have a non-key attribute that is dependent on part of the primary key, not the entire primary key. So if we look at this table that we've seen before, it's in first normal form because we have no repeating groups, but it's obviously not well structured. We have partial dependencies and we have a transitive dependency. And we'll look at eliminating both the partial dependencies and the transitive dependencies in this video. So here's our partial dependencies. Now remember that the primary key of this table is a composite primary key made up of the order ID and the product ID. And you can see that the order date is dependent only upon the order ID. It's not dependent upon the full primary key. Likewise with the customer ID and customer name. Also, notice that unit pricing is dependent upon the product ID. It's not dependent upon the total primary key or the combination of order ID and product ID. So those are our partial dependencies. Alright, so to eliminate or remove the partial dependencies, we have a formal process where we will create a new relation for each of the primary key attributes and each of the combinations of those primary key attributes. That is a determinant. And that is a decomposition process, so we want to make sure that when we're done with this, we have all the attributes accounted for. Then we're going to go through and look at which attributes are dependent on which specific determinants. So if we look again at our simple table, remember that our original primary key was order ID and product ID. And so we can see that that combination is a determinant and it determines quantity ordered. And therefore we create a new table, which in this example we call order line. And it has the primary key indicated as well as the column for quantity ordered. And notice quantity ordered is dependent upon both parts of the primary key. Then we had a partial functional dependency related to the product ID. And so we've pulled out the product ID determinant, and it determines unit price. So we've included unit price in a new table called product. And then finally, likewise, we had an order ID determinant, and we've pulled that out into a new table called customer order, and it determines the order date, the customer ID. Now notice we have a note that we have a transitive dependency here, and that's because customer name is really dependent upon customer ID, not the order ID. So while our table is in second normal form here, it's not in third normal form. Refresh your memory on third normal form and its process of removing transitive dependencies. We want to go back and just quickly review what a transitive dependency is. So basically we have the situation where we have a primary key determines some column, and that column, like column A, determines a column B. In this particular problem, the transitive dependency occurs because the order ID is the primary key and it determines the customer ID, which determines the customer name. So again, we have a process to remove transitive dependencies. And what we do is we basically, for each of the non-key attributes, in this case it would be our customer name, we move that into a new table as well as its determinant. So its determinant was customer ID. So we have a new table that has a primary key of the customer ID, and it determines the customer name, so it moves along with it. Now, the important thing here is when you remove a transitive dependency, you have to leave behind a foreign key that maintains that relationship. So that's a very important step and one that's often forgotten. So let's look at the actual data here. The new table that we created to get to third normal form is the customer table. Notice that its primary key is customer ID, which is the determinant, and it determines customer name. So customer name moved into that particular table. And then notice back in the order table, we left behind a foreign key because we need to maintain that relationship between order and customer. So at this point, our set of tables is in third normal form.